When we think about American history, we often cling to certain stories that have been passed down through generations. But many of these tales are more myth than fact. Take Betsy Ross, for instance. The story goes that she stitched the first American flag, but there's little evidence to support this claim. It was actually a committee led by George Washington that designed the flag, and Betsy's role is largely a product of 19th century nostalgia. Then there's the Confederate flag, which many mistakenly believe is a symbol of Southern heritage. In reality, it was only used by the Army of Northern Virginia during the Civil War and became a symbol of segregation and racism long after the war ended. Christopher Columbus is another figure shrouded in myth. We celebrate him for discovering America, but he never set foot on the mainland. His voyages primarily took him to the Caribbean, and his arrival marked the beginning of centuries of colonization and suffering for indigenous peoples. The Liberty Bell, a symbol of American independence, is often thought to have cracked during the signing of the Declaration of Independence. In truth, it cracked years later during a celebration of George Washington's birthday. Speaking of Washington, many believe he was the first president of the United States, but he was actually the first president under the current Constitution. Before that, the Continental Congress had presidents, but they held far less power. And let's not forget Ronald Reagan and the Iranian hostages. A popular myth suggests that he orchestrated a deal to delay their release until after the 1980 election. In reality, the hostages were released on Inauguration Day, and there's no solid evidence of a conspiracy. Paul Revere's ride is another tale that's been romanticized. He didn't ride alone. He was part of a network of riders, and his message was less about warning of British troops and more about rallying the militia. The first Thanksgiving is often depicted as a harmonious feast between Pilgrims and Native Americans, but the reality was much more complex. The Pilgrims were seeking religious freedom, but their arrival led to the displacement and suffering of indigenous peoples. The Emancipation Proclamation is frequently misinterpreted as the moment slavery ended. In truth, it only freed slaves in the Confederate States, leaving many in border states still enslaved until the 13th Amendment was ratified. The burning of the Salem witches is often sensationalized. Only a handful of people were actually executed, and the trials were fueled by mass hysteria and social tensions, not a genuine belief in witchcraft. George Washington's appearance is often exaggerated. He didn't wear wooden teeth, but rather a set of dentures made from ivory and other materials. The signing of the Declaration of Independence is depicted as a grand event, but most delegates signed it weeks or even months later. The date we celebrate, July 4, 1776, is when Congress adopted the document, not when it was signed. The Civil War is often framed as a noble fight for freedom, but it was primarily about the preservation of slavery. The Founding Fathers had a range of beliefs, and while some were abolitionists, many owned slaves and accepted the institution as part of their society. Japanese American internment camps during World War II are often glossed over. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated, a dark chapter fueled by fear and prejudice rather than any real threat. Lastly, the Pilgrims didn't come to the New World solely for freedom. They were also seeking economic opportunities. And the number of U.S. states has changed over time, from the original 13 to the current 50, reflecting the nation's growth and expansion. History is often a tapestry woven with truths and myths. Understanding the real stories behind these events is crucial for a more accurate view of our past.